My name is Michael, and this story has been haunting me for 6 years. I've never shared it online before, partly because I've been terrified of how people might react. The truth is, I'm not sure if anyone would even believe me. For years, I've convinced myself to stay quiet, laughing nervously at the thought that anyone might think I'm just making it all up. But it's real. And to this day, I'm not sure what I experienced, if it was paranormal, psychological, or something far darker. It all began when my family and I moved into our new house. I remember the timing clearly. It was about 6 years ago, and we'd only been in the place for 8 or 9 months by then. The house itself wasn't anything remarkable, an ordinary 2-story home in a quiet suburb, but there was something about it that always felt off. It's hard to explain, but there were moments when the air felt heavy, like the house was watching us. Still, we shrugged it off. My parents loved the place, and I'd convinced myself I was just being paranoid. It was around Christmas when the incident happened. I remember that distinctly because the house was decked out in holiday cheer, garlands, twinkling lights, and a towering Christmas tree in the living room. My parents had gone out that afternoon to do some last-minute shopping, leaving me home alone. I was 16 at the time, old enough to fend for myself, and I actually relished the solitude. It was around 3 p.m. when they left, and I was in my room scrolling through my phone, feeling restless but not particularly tired. But then something strange happened. The next thing I knew, I was jolting awake to find that it was 8 p.m. My phone, which I always kept close, showed the time in glaring numbers, and I felt a cold rush of confusion. I couldn't remember falling asleep. One moment I was fully awake, and the next, 5 hours had vanished. It wasn't like drifting off into a nap, it was more like a void of nothingness. A gnawing sense of unease crept over me, but I pushed it aside. Stop overthinking, I told myself. Maybe you're just exhausted. Still, something about the lost time left a bitter taste in my mouth. I felt like I'd missed something important. Deciding to shake off the weirdness, I figured it was a good time to take a shower before my parents returned. I didn't want to deal with the hassle of waiting my turn later. Our bathroom was just down the hall from my room, and it had one of those sliding glass doors for the bathtub. The glass was always spotless, allowing an unobstructed view into the tub itself. I flipped on the light, the fluorescent bulbs humming to life as I stepped into the bathroom. Like always, I glanced at my reflection in the mirror. I've never been one to admire myself, but I've made it a habit to check for stray hairs or smudges on my face before stepping into the shower. That's when I noticed it. My reflection looked off. It's hard to describe. My eyes seemed darker, more hollow, and there was a shadow around my face that didn't match the light in the room. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just my imagination. "You're tired," I muttered under my breath. But when I turned toward the tub, all rationality flew out the window. Lying there, sprawled grotesquely in the bathtub, was a body. Not just any body, it was human, gutted and decayed, like something out of a nightmare. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut. Its flesh was pale and mottled with greenish-black decay, and the smell, oh God, the smell, was unbearable. It was as if death itself had crawled into our bathroom. My legs gave out beneath me, and I collapsed against the bathroom wall. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. My mind raced, trying to process the impossible scene before me. Who was it? How did it get there? Why didn't I hear anything? A wave of nausea hit me, and I struggled to keep from vomiting. I needed my phone. It was still in my room, just a few steps away, but the thought of leaving the bathroom, of turning my back on that thing, made my skin crawl. My chest heaved with shallow breaths as I tried to steady myself, but the air felt thick, suffocating. And then, just like that, everything went black. When I came to, I was no longer alone. My father was shaking me awake, his voice filled with panic. "Michael! Michael, wake up! What happened?" His face was a mix of fear and confusion, but I couldn't answer him. All I could do was sob uncontrollably, clutching at his shirt like a terrified child. The bathroom was empty. The tub was clean. The smell was gone. It was as if none of it had ever happened. But I know what I saw. And I know that for those 5 missing hours, something had taken hold of me, something dark, something evil. To this day, I don't know what it was. I've tried to rationalize it, to explain it away as a hallucination or a trick of my exhausted mind, but deep down, I know the truth. Whatever happened that night wasn't normal. And it's not over. I can feel it in the house, in the air, in the way shadows linger just a little too long. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye. A shadow darting across the hallway, a faint whisper just out of earshot. It's as if the house remembers, as if it's waiting for the right moment to remind me of what it can do. And I'm terrified that next time, it won't let me wake up. Ever since that night, my life has never been the same. I've grown used to living with an undercurrent of dread, a constant awareness that I'm never truly alone. The house, it's alive. I'm sure of it now. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But the evidence has piled up too high to ignore. The whispers were the first thing I noticed after the incident. At first, they were faint, barely audible. A soft, sibilant hiss that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe the wind. But as the weeks went on, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They sounded like voices, though I couldn't make out the words. Sometimes, I would hear my name, spoken so clearly it was as if someone were standing right behind me. Michael. Every time I heard it, my blood ran cold. I'd spin around, expecting to see someone, something, but there was never anything there. The air would feel heavy, oppressive, and I'd be left standing in the middle of an empty room, my heart pounding in my chest. My parents never heard the whispers, no matter how much I insisted they listen. They chalked it up to stress or an overactive imagination, and I eventually stopped bringing it up. But it wasn't just the whispers. The shadows began to move, too. They'd flicker at the edges of my vision, darting across the walls and ceilings like living, sentient things. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. I'd been spending too much time staring at screens, I told myself. But no amount of sleep or screen-free days made the shadows go away. If anything, they became bolder, lingering longer, moving closer. One night, I swear I saw a shadow reach for me, its inky black fingers stretching across the floor toward my bed. I didn't sleep at all that night. My parents noticed the change in me. They said I looked pale, tired, jumpy. They thought I was struggling with school or friends, but I couldn't tell them the truth. How do you explain to someone that your own house is trying to drive you insane? I tried to act normal, to pretend like everything was fine. But the house wasn't about to let me go that easily. One evening, a few months after the bathtub incident, I was sitting in the living room watching TV. My parents were upstairs, and I was finally beginning to feel a little more at ease. The show I was watching was loud, filling the room with laughter and canned applause. For a moment, I almost felt normal again. And then the TV turned off. Just like that, the screen went black, plunging the room into silence. I stared at the blank screen, remote clutched tightly in my hand. At first, I thought it was just a power outage, but the lights were still on. The remote's batteries were fresh, and when I tried to turn the TV back on, it wouldn't respond. That's when I heard it again. Michael. The voice was louder this time, more insistent. It sounded like it was coming from the hallway. My heart pounded as I stood up, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get out of the house. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself walking toward the hallway, drawn by some invisible force. The air grew colder with every step, and the whispers grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony of voices that made my head spin. When I reached the hallway, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, and I felt a sudden, crushing sense of dread. And then I saw it. At the end of the hallway, just outside my bedroom door, was a figure. It was tall and cloaked in shadow, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. It had no face, but I could feel it watching me, its presence pressing down on me like a physical weight. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there frozen in terror. But I couldn't move. The figure raised a hand, or something that resembled a hand, and pointed at me. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. The hallway was empty, and I was left standing there, shaking and gasping for air. When I finally found the courage to move, I bolted upstairs to my parents' room. I didn't tell them what I'd seen. Instead, I made up some excuse about a bad dream and asked if I could sleep in their room that night. They didn't question it, and for the first time in months, I felt a small sense of safety. But I knew it wouldn't last. The house wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, I woke up with an ache in my chest and a hollow feeling in my gut. The events of the previous night felt like a vivid nightmare, but I knew they were real. My parents were already up, bustling about the kitchen, preparing breakfast. I didn't mention the figure or the whispers. What would I even say? They'd dismiss it as a bad dream or stress. So I ate my breakfast in silence, the taste of scrambled eggs and toast turning to ash in my mouth. School offered no respite. The whispers followed me there, faint but persistent. Sometimes, I'd catch a shadow darting across the edge of my vision in the crowded hallways. I began to withdraw, avoiding my friends and spending most of my free time in the library, where the lights were bright and the corners lacked shadows. But even then, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. One afternoon, as I sat in the library trying to focus on a book, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom, "Come straight home after school. We need to talk." My stomach sank. The last thing I wanted was to go back to that house, but I had no choice. The final bell rang, and I trudged home, the unease growing with every step. When I walked through the front door, my mom was waiting for me. Her face was pale, her eyes lined with worry. She gestured for me to sit down in the living room, and my dad joined us a moment later. The air was heavy with an unspoken tension. "Michael," my dad began, his voice unusually soft. "We've been noticing some strange things around the house." My heart skipped a beat. "Like what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My mom exchanged a glance with my dad before answering. "Lights turning on and off by themselves. Strange noises in the middle of the night. And last night, I swear I saw a shadow moving in the hallway, but when I went to check, there was nothing there." A cold chill ran down my spine. They'd seen it too. I wasn't crazy. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We didn't want to scare you," my dad said. "But it's getting worse. We think it might be time to get some help." "Help?" I echoed. "Like what? An exorcist?" My dad frowned. "We were thinking more along the lines of a paranormal investigator. Someone who can tell us what's going on and how to fix it." I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, I was relieved that they were taking the situation seriously. On the other hand, The idea of bringing someone else into our nightmare felt like opening a door we couldn't close. But what choice did we have? The house was unraveling us, piece by piece. The investigator arrived a few days later. Her name was Evelyn, and she carried an air of quiet authority. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through me. She brought a small team with her, armed with equipment I didn't recognize, cameras, EMF detectors, and other strange gadgets. "This house has a heavy energy," Evelyn said as soon as she stepped inside. "I'll need to conduct a thorough investigation, but I can already tell that whatever's here, it's strong." My parents and I watched as Evelyn and her team set up their equipment. They placed cameras in every room and used the EMF detectors to scan for unusual activity. Evelyn carried a digital recorder, asking questions into the air and pausing to listen for responses. "Is anyone here?" she asked in a calm, steady voice. "If you want to communicate, now is your chance." The air felt charged, like the calm before a storm. We watched the equipment, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then it did. One of the EMF detectors lit up, its lights flashing wildly. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath fogging in the air. Evelyn's recorder picked up a faint, garbled voice. She played it back for us, and my blood ran cold. "Michael," the voice whispered. Evelyn's expression grew grave. "Whatever's here knows you," she said, turning to me. "You need to be careful. It's attached to you." "Attached?" I echoed, my voice shaking. "What does that mean?" "It means that this entity has chosen you for some reason," Evelyn explained. "It's drawn to your energy. And it's not going to let go easily." The investigation lasted several hours, and by the end of it, Evelyn had gathered enough evidence to confirm what I already knew: our house was haunted. But it wasn't just the house. It was me. Evelyn believed that the entity had latched onto me during the bathtub incident and was using the house as a conduit to torment me. She recommended a cleansing ritual, but she warned us that it might not be enough. "This entity is strong," she said. "You may need to leave this house entirely to escape it." My parents were hesitant. They'd poured their savings into this house and couldn't afford to move. But for me, staying wasn't an option. I could feel the entity's grip tightening, its presence growing more oppressive with each passing day. The cleansing ritual was scheduled for the following week. Until then, Evelyn advised me to keep a journal of any unusual occurrences. "It'll help us track the activity," she said. "And it might give you some sense of control." I nodded, though I doubted a journal would do much to ease my fear. That night, as I lay in bed clutching a pen and notebook, the whispers returned. But this time, they weren't faint. They were loud, clear, and filled with malice. "You can't escape me," the voice hissed. Tears streamed down my face as I wrote down every word, my hands trembling. I didn't know if I'd survive the week, but I had to try. The entity had taken so much from me already. I couldn't let it take my sanity too. The cleansing ritual was an event I will never forget. Evelyn arrived with her team early in the morning, their expressions grim and determined. They brought an assortment of tools, sage bundles, candles, holy water, and objects inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize. The air in the house was tense, almost crackling with an unseen energy. Evelyn began by explaining the process to my family and me. "We're going to cleanse every room, starting with the most active areas," she said. "Michael, you're going to stay with me the entire time. The entity is attached to you, so it's crucial that you remain part of the ritual." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. My parents stayed close by, their faces pale but resolute. Evelyn's team started by lighting the sage and moving through the house, chanting softly as they waved the smoke into every corner. The smell was sharp and earthy, filling the air with a sense of something ancient and powerful. When we reached the bathroom, the site of the original incident, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The air grew icy cold, and the lights flickered. Evelyn's chant grew louder, more forceful, as she sprinkled holy water around the room. The EMF detectors went wild, their lights flashing and beeping erratically. "It's here," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the chaos. I felt a sudden pressure in my chest, as if an invisible hand was trying to crush me. I gasped, clutching at my shirt, and Evelyn immediately turned to me. "Michael, repeat after me," she commanded. She began to recite a prayer or incantation, I'm not sure which, and I struggled to echo her words through my ragged breaths. The pressure intensified, and for a moment, I thought I was going to pass out. But then, just as suddenly as it had come, the pressure lifted. The air in the room grew warmer, and the lights stopped flickering. Evelyn lowered her arms, her face glistening with sweat. "That was just the beginning," she said. "We need to finish this." The team moved methodically through the rest of the house, repeating the cleansing ritual in every room. The entity fought back at times, manifesting as shadows that darted across the walls or sudden, deafening noises that made us jump. But Evelyn and her team pressed on, their determination unwavering. When we finally reached the living room, the last room to be cleansed, Evelyn instructed my parents to join hands with me in a circle. "This is the final step," she said. "We're going to banish the entity once and for all. But it's going to fight us. You have to stay strong." We stood together, our hands linked, as Evelyn began the final chant. The air grew heavy, and a low, guttural growl filled the room. It sounded inhuman, and my legs trembled with fear. Suddenly, the candles around us flared, their flames rising impossibly high. Shadows swirled around us, coalescing into a dark, amorphous shape in the center of the room. The entity. It loomed over us, its form shifting and writhing. I could feel its hatred, its fury, radiating toward me. Evelyn's chant grew louder, her voice cutting through the oppressive atmosphere like a knife. "You have no power here," she shouted. "Leave this place and never return." The entity let out a deafening roar, and the room shook violently. My parents clung to me, their faces pale with terror. I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing on Evelyn's voice, willing myself to believe in her power. And then, with a final, ear-splitting crack, the entity was gone. The room fell silent. The air felt lighter, cleaner, as if a weight had been lifted. Evelyn lowered her arms, her face a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "It's over," she said. Tears streamed down my face as I collapsed onto the couch, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. My parents hugged me tightly, their own tears falling freely. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Evelyn stayed with us for a while, explaining what we needed to do to keep the house protected. "The entity is gone, but you must remain vigilant," she said. "Keep the energy in this house positive. Avoid inviting negativity, and if anything unusual happens, call me immediately." We followed her advice to the letter. Over the next few weeks, the house felt different. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. The whispers stopped, and the shadows no longer moved on their own. I began to sleep through the night for the first time in months, and my parents said they felt more at ease as well. But even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that the entity is still out there, waiting. I've learned to live with the scars it left behind, but I'll never forget the fear, the helplessness, the sense of being hunted in my own home. The house may be clean, but a part of me will always be haunted.